Hey, welcome to the show, State of the Arts London. My name is Mick. I am your host. This month, I have Eric Drummond on the show, local artist. Amazing what he does. You'll see we have a nice long chat. Don't have a lot of time to do a lot of preamble here. So we're going to get to the show. Let's go. Yeah, well, we can trim that up and make that. Welcome to, thank you for sitting down with me. I appreciate it very much. This is State of the Arts London, Ontario. We're doing it a little different today. We're in your studio, which is a lot better than my apartment set that we do. It's,
I don't know about that. Yeah,
yeah, it's nice. Look, man, your work is beyond reproach. I don't know how many times you need to hear that, but your work is good. And how did you get here? You're not that old, my friend.
I know.
This again, appreciate from the eye of a non. I'm a photographer, so I get light and I get all that kind of stuff.
Sure,
but the process in which you go through, this is a skilled hand, sir.
It's I guess the hand has a lot to do with it, but I think of it more about like the eye and the mind is more. I think what. If I go back and think about my education, I think it's more that I was taught to see a certain way as opposed to just actually physically handle, the brush or the charcoal or the graphite. But I guess it all starts where I, for some reason, loved drawing people and things, right? Yeah. I was, I always say that I'm kind of I feel as though I'm a regular guy that just likes to make artwork. And I have a Italian cultural upbringing and Portuguese, and obviously that has an enormous influence on my taste and what I learned, and so I was very drawn to the Italian Renaissance via my grandfather. He introduced that to me, and I fell in love with it. But as a kid, I was drawing Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z and superheroes, and making my own superheroes and things like that. Yeah. And then I had, depending on the season, obviously, I had this sort of, this feeling that I always wanted to draw spiritual subject matter too. So I would draw like crucifixes and nativity scenes and things that revolved around my Catholic upbringing.
Of course, yeah.
I guess that, like my grandfather seeing that too, inspired him to show me the Italian Renaissance artists. Okay. And you see that, and then you're like, wow, these are these are cultural superheroes, in a way. So yeah. I was very drawn to it, and I became obsessed with sort of copying and sketching old masterwork since I was a young child, which I think is kind of strange for a 7-year-old to do.
Well, you're not taking Spider-Man out of that.
No,
you know what I mean? That's,
but it's Spider-Man to me it was like Spider-Man in a different way, because it's still, especially with someone like Michelangelo, it's still these like hulking superhero figures, right? These powerful bodies, which I think was always something that I was really fond of. And and I think as I grew up, you're a kid and you're surrounded by other kids who like to play sports and have other affinities, and you all of a sudden you're like, well, is art like the thing that I want to do?
Early on you're faced with a choice. Gender biases and all that.
Exactly.
Stuff. Yeah.
And you're kind of you don't want to be left out, right? And so you in high school, I was very much, I was always drawing and painting in high school, but I was never I never owned it as like something that I said, I want to go do this. It was like just something, like you're doodling in your math book, and people were like, oh, that's really good. And I'm like, I like to draw, and that's about it. Yeah. But art class was sort of that liberation for me. Like we didn't have an extraordinarily prolific art program at CCH, but I loved my art classes because I just got to do what I wanted to do. Okay. And then I guess I fell into the peer pressure of like, what are you going to do as an artist? And so I made a concession where I was like, I'm going to go study art history, be a prof. That way I'll have an income. I'll have, a steady job, money won't be tight.
You got to pay the bills.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I went to the University of Guelph, and I began studying art history, which I loved. History is another subject matter that I adored. My grandfather again, he was a huge influence on me, and he was a great storyteller, and so he told me stories about, you know, the history of Italy and the history of these artists and ancient Rome, and it's interesting because it's almost like you're still building that foundation of creating images, but you're like, when people are telling you when people are reciting history to you, you're painting images in your head of what these things would happen. So you're kind of igniting that part of the brain that still goes into the creative process. And so I think that sort of element of history coupled with creativity was something that, like, I loved art history, and I loved learning about why artists made the things that they did, what for, the political kind of maneuvering of those things too, because it wasn't just artists were just making artwork because they were making artwork. It was
not at all.
Patrons and political movements. It is very complicated. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it all fascinated me because it's such a commentary on human behavior. You know, like, why do we use art to convey messages? You know. And what are the power of those messages? And I loved my art history classes, and I actually really fell in love with Celtic illuminated manuscripts, which is something that I sort of liked when I was younger, but I was never like, whoa, like, this fascinates me. But then learning about the process of how those monks made those books and the symbols as well, and symbolism was something that I was extremely drawn to. And it fascinated me. And my teacher was, again, like, half of it is the subject matter and half of it is, like, great teachers.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Oh my God. Like, the teachers that I had, my medieval art history prof at the University of Guelph was extraordinary. He snuck in, I remember he snuck in a Ethiopian illuminated manuscript. So it was like all these depictions of, like, the Holy Family, but, like, they were black, and he's like, don't tell anyone I brought this in, but, like, and he passed it around, and it's, like, in this, like, nice container, and it was just, like,
sense of glee.
And like, he wanted to share that with, like, and I think that's so admirable to see in a teacher, that he's so excited about what he loves that he has to share it. But in the end, I wasn't making anything, and that kind of was striking that chord in my soul, I guess, that it wasn't right, and I didn't feel right, and I dropped out, and I went home, and I went back to my family and my friends, and you kind of have, like, a you kind of, like, rejig, like you start asking questions of yourself, because at this point I was probably 22, 21, 22. Okay, so I'm young, and I don't know anything about myself at this point. Extremely insecure, right, about what I wanted to do and about who I am. And I'm lucky I had really great friends, and I have a really wonderful family that kind of supported me, and they, you know, I started taking care of my body. I started going to the gym, getting a routine, you know, and then seeing what the gym kind of helped me with was seeing small incremental changes and routines create long-term changes and really beneficial changes to my life. And then basically it ended up coming to the idea where I was like, okay, that's the art that I like. These are the artists that I like. What did they all do to achieve? And so they all studied in Florence. So I thought, well, it would be kind of cool if I could study in Florence. Like, but that seemed like a fever dream, you know? You're like, like, that's crazy. That seems ridiculous. And then you start, you know, wondering, and the power of the internet, you kind of start searching schools, and I came across the Florence Academy of Art, and the quality of their work and the faculty that was teaching at the time was super strong. All people that I really admired, and I liked their work. And you do that thing as a kid where you go, hey, Mom, like, would this be crazy? And I remember, I think she was outside. It was the summertime, I think, and I asked her, I was like, I want to apply, and I want to try and go. And obviously money comes into question. It's like, how much does it cost? What are the living conditions? Blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. And basically came to the decision where it's like, look, if you're going to do this, you have to fully commit, and this is all your responsibility. which I think the credit of my parents, that's such a valuable thing. Because I'm lucky enough to say that my parents would have had the means to be like, you know what, we have you, we'll pay, you go, and you come back and you're all fine. Yeah. And my parents were like, no, like this is your decision. You have to be responsible for it, which it made me there at that point in my life. I didn't think I was as motivated as I thought I was. You know, you're kind of in your 20s and you want to go out and you want to hang out with your friends and you don't have any sense of discipline, right? And so
distracted.
Yeah, extremely. And no priorities, like not the right ones at least. No. Yeah. And I think having that kind of hovering over my head where it's like, you're responsible for this, that was the first sort of, that and like obviously like going back into the gym was the first sort of like, oh, like I'm an extremely motivated individual and I need to like embrace that. And so I applied, I got accepted, and I was the third Canadian to go in their history of that school. Like not a lot of Canadians go, and there was one other Canadian while I was there, and he graduated, and I think I was like maybe the third Canadian or something like that to graduate. And they only accept about 35 students a year. Yeah. And so it was very, I was shocked, you know. I went to Fanshawe for half a term to build a portfolio that I could use to submit as an application. Right. Yeah. And I got accepted with my awful hyper-real drawings of like faces with like a mechanical pencil. And like, again, like hindsight's 20/20, you look at the work that you learn to make, and then you look at the work that and I'm sure in 20 years I'm going to look at what I did now and I'm going to be like, oh my God, what was I doing? But
nature of growth.
Yeah. Knowledge is a paradox. The more you know, the more your own ignorance is revealed to yourself, right? Yeah. So things become infinite. And I'm packing my bags and I'm going to Florence, and I'll never forget being on the plane and thinking that I wanted to get off the plane. Like, it's terrifying. It's such a terrifying prospect, because it's like, okay, life is going to be good or bad. My life is totally different after this moment. And so it was a huge risk, and I studied there for 3 years, and I learned classical and academic oil painting methods and draftsmanship. And
you do everything, right? Like, you're stretching your canvas.
So everything.
I assume that's
handmade.
Yeah, is that a kind of for year one thing? Do you get into that early? Or is that...
They're very good at introducing those things, like, as you go. So the first year is only drawing. You don't paint. You don't touch paint in your first year. Right. You start with graphite, because graphite has a very limited value range. And by values, I mean capacity to go dark to light. Okay. So you can't go as dark with a pencil as you can with charcoal. Okay. Right. And so you kind of, as you have students kind of in those restrictions, because it's easier to critique them, it's easier to make corrections, right? And it's a safer medium. And you start with pencil, and then as you move to pencil, you move to charcoal, and then you move to charcoal with white chalk, and you start toning your own paper, you start prepping your own paper, right? Which is kind of like a soft way of learning how to, like, getting into canvas building and canvas priming and things like that, right?
If you can do this well, then this next step.
Exactly. Like, you kind of graduate through the method as you go through the program, and even when you go to paint, you start with a grisaille. Grisaille is just using black, brown, and white, right? So it's like a monochromatic painting. You still play with temperature a bit in the painting, but it's nothing crazy. And then after grisaille, you do a limited palette, and then you move to full palette. And I didn't start painting until the beginning of my second year, when I was with Daniela Stone. And I had been asked twice in my first year to move up. So I was doing well in the course. There's a couple instances where they said, we want you to jump a project because we see that you're taking to the method well and things like that. And I said no both times, because I said, well, I'm here to learn, and I want to learn as much as I can. So give me the projects that are supposed to be laid out, and I'll do those. And so I only jumped one project, and that was we had these things called barg drawings. And barg drawings are essentially these plates that it has a drawing, and then you have to literally make an exact replica optically of the drawing. And like to the millimeter. And so it's very, like, you spend 5 weeks on these drawings.
Wow.
It's a lot, yeah. And you're measuring, remeasuring, and it's all to train your eye, right? It has nothing to do with your hand. And I remember being obsessed with like the cleanliness of the drawing, being like, it's charcoal, like charcoal's super messy, and like I don't want to like mess it up because it stains the paper if you wear it in too much. And my teachers were like, do not worry about the charcoal. It's about accuracy and just getting things right. And they're right, you know, obviously they know better than you. And that's another thing is,
Right. You know, go figure.
have the right attitude to be a student, right? Like be humble and take your criticisms on the chin. You're not there to be applauded, right? You're there to learn. And part of learning a technical trade is failure. And so I only skipped ahead with one project. I was asked to move up into second year early. I said no. And then eventually I did get to second year and I started painting. And second year is cool because you'll do a painting and then you'll go back to a drawing and then you go do a painting and then so you go back and forth. So you see the relatability of drawing and painting to each other, which I think is immensely important. And then eventually, you get to third year, and third year you're doing more formal projects. It's not just a figure painting. You're composing your own still lifes. You're composing your own portraits, and you're feeling more like a professional. And within reason, because in my opinion, a 3-year program of oil painting and drawing is not enough. Russian academies in the past used to do 7 years, which is like, you used to go to school to be an artist as long as lawyers would go to school, because they would evolve into doing large compositions, battle scenes, and religious, mythological things, like stuff like that, right? And really finding an identity. You basically have your identity as an artist when you graduate. Whereas now, at the end of my third year, I didn't know what kind of, like, I know my school work, but I didn't know what kind of artist I wanted to be. And so you come back to Canada and you have to kind of establish a footprint here, right? And so I came to TAP. I got in touch with Sandra, and she saw my work, and I would assume she took to it in order to be accepted. And she gave me a little studio space over around the corner there that had this like single fluorescent light bulb, and it was just like, it's like this cave.
Definite scream starving artist.
Yeah, and it screamed, like, it wasn't because I told her, I was like, I'd like natural light to light my portraits, and I also like working in natural light. It feels nice. I feel better. I don't like fluorescent lights. And she's like, we don't have one right now, but give me time, and and as soon as one comes available, I'll put you in there. And so I was working in this little, I call it a cave. It's a great studio space, but it was it was like kind of cold. It was very, ceilings were really high, but one light and like no windows, and you're just like, I don't know, you're just enclosed. And I liked it because it kind of forced me to get out of a comfort zone that I was in these wonderful studios in Florence, where it's, everything's provided for you, and then now it's like, okay, I got to make my own way here, and then eventually this space became available, and I took this space, and now I've sort of made it into my own little corner of Europe, I guess.
Yeah. There's, I feel like I've walked into a recreation of a gallery. Just everything. Your work is everywhere, but it's very interesting. You mentioned that schoolwork, that 5-week process to
make a drawing.
That's a very interesting exercise in itself, to make sure that you keep coming back to it.
Oh yeah. And staying dedicated to it, because I think like, even when I thought about the way that I drew before that, I'd like draw for 2 hours, and then you throw it's like, and then maybe you come back to it another day, or maybe another day. But like this, it was like arduous. It was we're gonna do a figure drawing from life, and everything was from life, right? You didn't use photos. And you're going to work with the model 5 days a week for 5 weeks, painting them. And at that point, because you're learning, 5 weeks didn't even feel like enough after a while. Like once you started getting kind of familiar with the method, you started to, like, again, knowledge is a paradox. You're like, oh wait, like there's more to like discover with oil painting, right? And with this technique. And you get to the end of 5 weeks and you're like, I didn't finish this. And your teachers are sort of laughing because all of your work in school is so overworked, right? Like I don't work the same way I did when I was in school because it's just not good for oil painting, right? Where you're painting the whole painting every day, 5 days a week. Like it's just like the linen is, I imagine the linen is like screaming because it can't absorb the oil in time. And I remember too, like working over like a surface that hadn't totally dried and it was wet and like things were shifting and things like that. But you had to do it because you had to learn to get the method first and then get your mistakes out and then you could learn to paint things in sections. And so I'm extremely lucky in the way that I can formulate my time with making portraits or making larger work, because it's kind of like you schedule time with models and you'll go, I need you for this day because we'll work on this part, and then maybe like a week later I'll use you for this part, and it works out. So yeah, it does, as you rightly said, it keeps you coming back, and it keeps that sort of, it almost teaches you an ethic of work where you're like, you keep coming back to your easel every day, you have that routine, and you see the process unfold in front of your eyes, and that's part of why you keep coming back, right?
Fair. Just to touch on it, so we've got, let's pick your solo, your own piece there. At what point are you done?
Yeah, that's a
is that a fair question?
Yeah, of course it's a fair question. I think that's the question that everyone asks as well, like with any artist, whether, and I think every artist is probably gonna have a different answer, which is probably super aggravating. But I think a large consensus of artists think that like you're never really done. Like you could always, for instance, I look at my own work and I always think I could always do more, or I could have changed this, or I don't like this, and you're your own worst critic. For that one, the self-portrait, I think I worked on that for 2 months, and like straight. And because it was a self-portrait, I had unlimited time to work because it was me, right? So I could come in whenever I wanted and work on it, and I did. I used to go in on the weekends to go and work on it, and I remember by the end of it, I was so drained of, not just tired, because I could have kept posing and painting, but all the faculties of what have been almost exhausted. Like there's no gas in the tank in terms of like observational things that you could do, or stylistic choices you can make, things like that. Because I always see it, and this is the analogy that my first year teacher, Simona Dolce, she always told me, is that you're an orchestra conductor, and you have to make sure all of your instruments are in harmony. Like you can't have the winds being louder than the percussion and things like that. So you're always sort of calibrating when you're looking at a work. It's like, okay, edges, chroma, temperature, values, drawing, structure, anatomy, style, or like creative liberties, things like that. Because there are happy accidents that happen in painting all the time where you're like, oh, I kind of like that happened, like I'll leave it, or you really render something so meticulously by that contrast. So with that, I think it was just every single part of that balancing and that conducting was exhausted, and I was like, there's nothing more I can give at this time. Maybe in 2 months I either have learned something else, or I've observed something else, or I just, actually what helps is you don't look at it.
You walk away.
And you walk away, and then you come back to it and you go, oh, I could change that. But at that point I got to a point where I said, I've taken this as far as I possibly can, and I'll leave it at that. And I never, for me, when I sign it, it's done. I don't touch it after that. Like as soon as the signature goes on it, it's done. That's just like a personal law I've given myself. Yeah, and I think you need to have that, right?
Yeah.
Or else
you need a cutoff point.
Yeah, you just fiddle with something
you
forever.
end up being Steven Spielberg and reworking.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And like again, like part of working this way, like you empathize with other creatives in other disciplines where, Steven Spielberg, you're like, yeah, I get it. Like you could just keep fiddling with something over and over again. Or even Da Vinci, right? And he was notorious for not finishing things and just like fiddling with, or getting distracted and things like that. So
distractions. I can only imagine what they were then versus what they are. So where are you going now? Like what's the next step for you?
When I came back to Canada, I sort of had a personal mission that I quietly kept to myself. where I want to be identifiably part of Canadian art culture in the sense that I want to make a difference in it and I want to contribute to it. So the idea that anything that I put out or any work that I put out is associated with my name is like immensely important to me. So I want everything that I put out to be really high quality. I want the images that I make and the things that I say to be important or have some sort of reverence to something about me personally or about the things that I've learned or studied personally in life. And I want to be one of Canada's great painters. It's kind of the way that we kind of look at Paul Peel for London, where we were like, oh, like Paul Peel, like we had him, you know, it's kind of, yes. We love that we have him, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to chase a sort of legacy. That's the long term, you know, and I'd like to start a school. I'd like to start a bottega where like artists can, especially in London, I think, because we have such good high school programs here. We do, yeah. Once they graduate, they don't have to leave. Like they can come here and be here and learn a skill set that they can apply to their own work. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily have to be classical or anything like that. You learn painting and then you learn rules and then you break the rules, right? And that's the whole point of your journey in life as an artist. But I'm currently trying to work with the city to do a lot of public art. I want to do murals. I want to do artwork that people can just walk by and see, or really great paintings in important buildings in the city, things like that. And really established portraiture as well, do strong portraiture. And I think the culture of portraiture I'd like to bring into the city where it becomes a normalized thing where people go, I'd like to get my portrait done. Instead of it being this sort of like, oh, that's weird. Like that's not a, yeah. I had a commission in Nashville for a wonderful client, and it's such a normal thing where they say, yeah, you know, we get our portraits done, and it's a tradition, and it's, yeah. I think it's lovely because it's a way different form of immortalization than photography or a film or anything like that. So.
Well, even during photography, portraiture is not a thing.
Really?
You know, like there are certain things that you will do. You do headshots and that sort of thing, and you will do your CEO. Yeah. You know, but to commission even a family portrait anymore is very.
I think it's a wonderful thing in terms of like leaving a legacy and having things that generations look back on too. It's. I love going into UWO and you see like all the paintings of, you know, the former deans and headmasters and things like that. It's super cool.
That's good. Well, thank you very much. It's been incredible. Taking time out of your day, I appreciate it very, very much.
My pleasure, yeah.
All right, everyone. That's what I got for you this month. Next month, Jordan Buck on the show. She is a local musician. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk about things like, the talent drain to Toronto. We're going to talk about ageism. We're going to talk about all sorts of stuff and being authentic and being yourself. So please tune in next month.